If I had had a knife at that moment, I would have stabbed myself. Just let those words sink in for a second. That is the dark, incredibly devastating admission of Italian football legend Roberto Baggio. He's talking about the exact moment he sent a penalty kick sailing into the California night sky during the 1994 World Cup final. I mean, stop and really think about the visceral, unbearable weight of that single moment on the world stage. It is an agony that absolutely defies description.
Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you with us today because we're unpacking a really fascinating, deeply human theme. We are looking at how human beings process immense pressure, traumatic history, and monumental failure. And we're going to do this by looking through two incredibly powerful but vastly different lenses. First, the agonizingly loud public stage of global sports, and second, the meticulously crafted private worlds of contemporary literature. Both of these arenas show us exactly what happens when a single moment leaves a ghost behind.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the weight of a moment.
So let's dive into our first case study of just intense real-world pressure. Picture the scene. It's the 2010 World Cup quarterfinal. The stakes literally could not be any higher. Ghana is on the absolute verge of becoming the very first African country to ever reach a World Cup semifinal. And they're doing it in South Africa, which is the first time the tournament has ever been hosted on the continent. The entire continent is rallying behind them. We are in extra time, minute 120, the final dying seconds of the game. There's a frantic scramble in the box, a header goes toward the goal, and Uruguay's Luis Suarez deliberately blocks it on the goal line with his hand. Red card. Penalty for Ghana. Up steps Asamoah Gyan, a guy who is in the form of his life. If he scores, there's no shootout. They just win. But he strikes the crossbar. The ticking clock of that moment, the sudden, violent shift from pure euphoria to absolute heartbreak, it's unimaginable. And Ghana, unfortunately, goes on to lose the subsequent penalty shootout.
Yet here is the really interesting thing. When you listen to Asamoah Gyan reflect on that night today, he doesn't just sit in the darkness of it. Despite the sheer agony of that miss, he points out that people are still incredibly proud of what that team achieved for Africa. He actually said, "We left a lot of good memories for Ghanaians to talk about." And honestly, it's a huge testament to the fact that while a failure can feel monumental in the moment, the effort and the journey can still cement a deeply positive legacy.
Moving right along to Section 2, ghosts on the pitch.
Now, not every missed penalty ends with that kind of grace, right? Some completely rewrite football folklore for the worse. Just look at the sheer volume of absolute legends on this list compiled by Punch NG who crumbled when the pressure peaked. It's staggering. You got Mohamed Salah in a 2022 World Cup playoff, stepping up while literally being blinded by a chaotic swarm of green laser pointers from the crowd and missing. You have Brahim Diaz in the 2025 AFCON final. His team is seconds away from victory, and he attempts this arrogant, chipped Panenka-style penalty and fails spectacularly. It just instantly drained the stadium of belief. It really proves that bravery and arrogance look exactly identical, right up until the ball stops moving. And we can't ignore the psychological toll extending from these moments, because it is severe. Jadon Sancho missed in the Euro 2020 final, and the horrific racist abuse that followed stalled his promising career, completely altering his trajectory. John Terry slipped in the Moscow rain during the 2008 Champions League final, and that's a miss he has openly admitted burdened and haunted him for years. These are not just missed goals. They are defining traumas that these men have to wake up with every single day.
Which brings us to Section 3. Fictionalizing our darkest history. Now, what's really interesting about this transition is how we're moving from the loud public agony of athletes to the quiet, meticulous exploration of trauma in literature. Because on the pitch, the ghost is public, right? Millions of people watch you slip. But in the pages of a novel, authors allow us to explore the private ghost. We're talking about the generational traumas and hidden secrets that kind of linger in the shadows. The Spring 2024 Susanna Lee Associates catalog highlights some incredible works doing exactly this. Sometimes it's literal, like in Laura McLaughlin's The Many Ghosts of Donahue Byrnes, where a young woman has to wrangle actual spirits in an Irish hotel. But more often than not, these ghosts are deeply historical.
And this is a brilliant illustration of how authors confront those real historical ghosts. On one hand, we have Mark Levy's The Symphony of Monsters. Levy, whose own grandparents died at Auschwitz, was completely horrified to learn of the estimated 20,000 Ukrainian children kidnapped following the 2022 invasion. So he wrote this novel to ensure that future generations can never look back at us and say, we didn't know. And then on the other hand, Valiane Huysmans' The Monuments of Paris. is a daughter's deeply personal exploration of her grandfather, who was a Jewish French official persecuted by the Vichy regime. And it looks at her father's subsequent trauma as a Holocaust survivor. It's fundamentally about how huge, public history shatters very private lives.
And the thing about trauma is that it reverberates through time. It echoes. In Fiona McFarlane's brilliant collection of short stories, Highway 13, she looks at the aftermath of a 1998 serial killer's crimes in Australia. But she doesn't just focus on the immediate horror. She explores how that trauma echoes decades into the future, warping personal histories and even fueling public fascination through things like true crime podcasts. It really asks us to consider, at what cost do we consume these stories?
Let's look at Section 4, Confronting the Past.
Because whether you are a player on the pitch or a character in a novel facing down a horrific history, you have to figure out how to navigate the immediate aftermath. Take Philippe Collins' novel, The Barman of the Ritz, which is actually based on a true story. It's June 1940. Paris is occupied, but the Ritz Hotel stays open. The protagonist, Frank Mayer, is a world-renowned barman there. He is serving cocktails to the Nazi elite every single night. Now imagine the pressure. It's unimaginable because Frank is hiding a fatal secret. He is Jewish. Every single smile, every drink he pours is an intense, daily high-wire act of survival, constantly masking his true identity just to stay alive and protect the people he loves.
Or consider the deeply intimate, personal resilience we see in Rachel Stark's debut novel, Paris, California. The protagonist, Tessa, is living in a trailer, pregnant, having survived horrific abuse from her stepfather. Her only past solace was her teenage love, another girl named Mel, whom she lost. And when Mel suddenly returns years later, Tessa has to navigate all of that buried trauma to find a path toward genuine healing in rural America. It's raw, it's painful, but it's entirely about pushing through the ghost of your past.
And finally, Section 5, The Search for Redemption.
This perfectly brings our literary and sporting worlds back together, because ultimately, both of these realms are totally obsessed with the exact same goal: emotional release. Just look at the parallels. In literature, characters find closure by finally unearthing wartime secrets. For example, in the novel Last Boat to America, the character Corinne has to painstakingly trace her estranged mother's escape from the Nazis in 1940 across continents just to understand her own life and find some grace. In sports, that search for grace means doing literally the hardest thing imaginable: stepping right back up to the exact penalty spot that broke you.
Which brings us to Stuart Pearce. Pearce missed a devastating penalty for England against West Germany in the 1990 World Cup semifinal, and that weighed on him for 6 long, agonizing years. But then, at Euro 96, he stepped up to take another one, and he scored. The raw, screaming emotion on his face in that moment wasn't just a celebration, it was a full-blown exorcism. He later said something incredibly profound about it. He said, "For me, failure wouldn't have been to miss again. Failure would have been not to try." And if you want to talk about poetic irony and the search for redemption, get a load of this. In that very same Euro 96 tournament where Stuart Pearce found his peace, a young Gareth Southgate missed his penalty against Germany. And that single miss triggered a curse. England went on to exit 4 consecutive major tournaments on penalties. Decades of national trauma. But football, much like the best novels, absolutely loves a full-circle narrative. In 2018, England finally broke that shootout curse. And who is the manager standing on the sidelines guiding them through it? Gareth Southgate. Redemption, delay but undeniably delivered. So, we arrive at the ultimate question really: how do we live with our ghosts? Whether it's a slip on the wet grass in Moscow, a kidnapped child in Ukraine, or a haunting secret in a Parisian hotel, monumental failure and trauma are always going to leave a mark. But as these athletes and authors show us time and time again, those moments do not have to be the end of the story. Our legacies aren't defined merely by the ghosts that haunt us, but by the incredible, resilient ways we choose to carry them forward. So what ghosts are you carrying, and how will they shape your next chapter? Think about that for a bit. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.